This is an apple. Can you tell me all the steps this apple went through before it ended up in my hands? All of this is called supply chain traceability. Today, we're going to get to know a company that deals exactly with this and solves a lot of problems for businesses.
Because tracing a simple product, even just like this apple, is sometimes really a challenge.
Filera is part of the Kobo group that offers technologies and solutions for product traceability. And all this naturally leads to supply chain transparency. Insolidone helps us have all the company data, and not only that, organized in a single tool. Let's take the example of this salad I just picked. This salad is in a field, I worked it, so I have data about the processing, how much fertilizer I used, how much water I gave. Maybe if it's organic, I need to have certification of the products and the method I used. I have all the data about when it was harvested, that is at any moment where I stored it and how I stored it. That is the refrigerators, the steps that were taken, the crate where I put it inside, and above all the steps it went through before reaching your plate. All this works for lettuce, it works for apples, but let's try to look at a slightly more complex case of a processed product. For example, a frozen pizza that we find in a supermarket. Let's see how the software tracks everything.
You find it in the supermarket. It's a common product, but it has its own complexity because, for example, it contains mozzarella, it contains tomato, it contains flour. So, in short, there are some pretty complex supply chains involved. What does the supply chain software do? It finds out what the supply chain is. That is behind a certain product, so a real supply chain.
Let's clarify for a moment. When we talk about a food product, we're not just referring to those who produced the raw material, those who processed it, or those who sold it, but also to all the people who interacted with this product. For example, packaging and transportation. Those who transported it. The supply chain can even trace the suppliers of the suppliers. As you can imagine, we risk having a huge amount of information, and that's exactly why we need a good, structured, and versatile method. But where do we find all the information, and where not necessarily everyone can see all the information, the whole history of the product? Maybe we'll only show the final customer certain suppliers or just some steps. To the certification body, for example, for an organic or any other certification, we'll show only the steps that are relevant for the certification. And instead, we will have all the steps that have been done, for example, from my salad, my apple, or the pizza. But in the case of pizza, if we have different batches, can the supply chain trace those as well?
My apple, you first notice the supply chain structure.
This here is the supply chain behind this pizza.
Right? With the direct producers, those who produce the tomatoes, those who produce the mozzarella for pizza, but in turn, they would have had to get the milk from some dairies or the tomatoes from a cooperative. And then it goes all the way to the barn or to the field of the individual farmer. And by clicking on the individual company, you can access the technical or sustainability information of that company.
So I can see the certification, in this case, the certification that the company has.
At this point, you as a farmer like me are probably starting to worry because you'll start saying, but I have to collect a lot of data, and then with all this data, what am I actually going to do with it? Of course, we're talking about a much more elaborate system, and the power of the supply chain naturally develops more on a macro level. The more components we add, the more powerful the software becomes. Let's look at some practical examples. I am a farmer, a supplier to a cooperative. This cooperative sells my salads and my honey to a supermarket. In all of this, the cooperative wants to track exactly when the processing was done, where the various salads come from precisely to provide full traceability.
I, as a farmer, for example, can take advantage of Kobo Touch, but let's see what it is.
Kobo Touch is a digital platform designed for OEMs, manufacturers of agricultural and off-highway machines who want to turn the data from their machines into value. It enables remote monitoring, advanced diagnostics, fleet management and maintenance management, improving reliability, productivity, and after-sales service. A scalable and integrable solution designed to support the evolution of connected machines and digital services. In the agricultural sector, I can automatically provide all the data to the supply chain, so the cooperative and the supermarket are able to have all the data tracked. And this is not only useful for tracking food, but also for giving me information. So I know exactly that a certain quality of lettuce or a certain type of lettuce that was much more appreciated was produced with a certain method, with a certain machine. And so I can go and replicate the result, and for the farmer, everything is done automatically.
This is the other great feature of the supply chain platform. It's the fact that you keep producing batches of pizza, and each batch from our point of view has its own identity and its own story made up of data and documents. It's precise, it's dynamic in the sense that it's a supply chain that is built automatically based on purchases and sales, so you can't design it yourself. The supply chain structure depends on what you declare, who you buy from, and who you sell to.
You can imagine that if your company has a certification, the supply chain platform is a godsend.
But if one day you have a certification audit, you could, for example, give access to a certification body by saying, look, you already have a whole series of data available through Filera. I'll give you access. You can check them. So when you come to the farm, instead of spending an hour and a half here asking me to pull out papers from the folders, you just come and check for 15 minutes those few things you absolutely have to check on site because you've already seen everything else through Filera. This is another way a company could take advantage. You only collect the data once. This is also important, that there are no duplicate data, no duplicate information, but you can make the data available to different company departments for different purposes. There will be someone from quality who needs to do control analyses. There will be someone from sales who needs to share it with the client so the same data can be made available to different stakeholders, to different users, depending on how you want to use it.
The same platform where several people with different interests, let's put it that way, can go and get the data to make better use of it.
Right?
Exactly. The value is really in bringing them together because that's where a higher level of knowledge comes out.
Of course, Filera, in case you don't have the technology, for example, field sensors can provide them for you. All of this is naturally enhanced by the synergy with the Kobo Group.
I'll ask you one last question. So let's say the most interested parties, besides the typical agri-food company.
We've seen the pizza. It's really the consortia in this. Filera can be an interesting way, let's say, with a click in almost real time, because if I get the data, I can have a 360-degree view.
Right?
Absolutely.
So let's get back to our apple. You saw that Filera helps us bring together all the different components, all the various key players in a complex supply chain, like a pizza supply chain, a wood supply chain, or an even simpler one like an apple supply chain. Many times, especially in cooperatives where there is a cooperative with various producers like those of apples, it's very difficult to highlight the individual producer. Filera can also be one of the solutions for consortia to enhance by tracing the entire supply chain, the individual producer. So, if Filera has made you a bit curious, I'll leave all the direct links below so you can talk to them, get to know them, and understand what they can do for your supply chain. Matt the Farmer, see you in the next video. Bye everyone.